Why we keep falling for the famous Elvis fallacy. Let's continue our flash foresight journey. We will be discussing closing topics like why we keep falling for the Elvis fallacy, finding the fortune in hard trends, some $1,000,000 flash foresights like boomer video games, late life financial planning, on retirement homes, green funeral homes and boomer cemeteries. We will be talking to the American automaker. History may be wrong, but the future is very real. And we'll finish with some action steps for our weekly activity. Said this, let's begin. Welcome. As always, this is Victor M. Romo, your assigned lecturer for Identify Business Opportunities. So, despite all that has been said and written about the baby boom, we continue not to see it coming. Those 78 million boomers who were flooding America's ill-prepared kindergartens in the 1950s and America's ill-prepared college in the 1960s are now flooding our ill-prepared healthcare system. If our trend blindness persists in another 10 years, we won't have even a fraction of the doctors and nurses we need to care for this boom generation. Meanwhile, Americas and all over the region, also in Latin America, pension plans, along with Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, are catastrophically underfunded. Where is the money going to come from? Nearly 80 million baby boomers are going to need greatly increased healthcare only in the United States. Don't say about Mexico and abroad, with tens of millions more around the globe. That's definitely a hard trend. Are we going to be able to provide that care or not? And if we are, then who will be doing it? The providing, and how? The answers to those questions are soft trends. Again, notice what the hard trend is and where it is not. The increasingly numbers of boomers who will need medical care as they get older and their bodies need more repair is a hard trend, because those numbers are fixed and cannot be changed. But that projects lack of sufficient numbers of doctors and nurses to provide that care is a soft trend, because it is something we can change if we see it and elect to act on it. Here's an example of the difference between a hard trend and a soft trend. 10 years from now, assuming that we are still living, you are going to be 10 years older than you are today. That's a hard trend. Why? Because there's nothing you or anyone can do to change that fact. What will your state of health be like then? Worse? Better? Much worse? The same? I don't know. Neither do you. And neither does anyone else. It is not definitively knowable, because that is a soft trend. Why? Because you can do things to affect it. While we're on the subject of health, this is a point especially worth noting. A doctor's prognosis, no matter how clear or definitive it is, or it may seem, is never a hard trend. We often see it as such. When the man in the white coat intones, "I'm sorry, you have 6 months to live," it is pretty easy to feel grim, lonely, sad. But plenty of people have defied the doctor's predictions by months, even by years. How is that possible? By changing. whether through a change in diet, exercise, breathing, posture, location, attitude, strength of will, nutritional supplementation, natural supplementation, and other unconventional health approaches. People have the ability to take actions to change their state of health, which means it's always a soft trend. This is, in a nutshell, the power of flash foresight. Knowing how to identify hard trends gives us the ability to see the future. Knowing how to identify soft trends gives us the ability to shape the future. Recently, a colleague of mine who lives in Washington, D.C., told me that a car parked in a neighbor driveway down the street had been vandalized. The next day, it had happened again, this time to a neighbor just a few houses away. The following day, it happened again, this time to his next door neighbor's car. "Hey," I said, "things aren't good in looking for your car tonight." But was that a hard trend? No, it was soft, because he could take action and do something about it. He did. He got his car into a safe garage. A soft trend may have a good chance of happening, even an excellent chance. But no matter how likely it looks, it's not carved in stone. There's an opportunity to do something about it. For years, everyone seemed to accept that Toyota would eventually outsell GM. American automakers have been struggling ever since the 70s and the 80s, when they lost the quality edge to their Japanese competitors. And they've been in catch-up mode ever since, missing the hard trends for decades. For example, the rise of India, China, the new Chinese cars, the price of gas. Strangely enough, while we often treat the cyclic changes of real estate and stock prices as if they are linear and their values will go up forever, we also make the opposite mistake. We often treat a linear change as if it's cyclic. For decades, the big three automakers have been building cars as if cheap gasoline would continue forever. It won't. Actually, the price of gas is affected by both kinds of change, cyclic and linear. As are many things in our world, the key is to sort them out. The linear change patterns are the ones that trend to disrupt the status quo and change the direction of the future, and are therefore especially powerful. Seasonal consumption patterns, economic upticks and downturns, events in geopolitics and other cyclic influence do cause food prices to rise and fall. But these smaller cyclic influences pale beside a long-term hard trend that is inexorably driving up the price of gas overall. The continuously increasing global demand caused by an explosive growth in the middle class populations of emerging nations. It's not Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Venezuela that are overarching factors here. It's China and India. By the time you hold and understand this, there will be probably more cars being manufactured in China than in any other country in the world. We are starting to see it right now. And these newly auto-owning populations will not be going back to relying on bicycles. So yes, gas prices will fluctuate somewhat from week to week and season to season, and the impact of events such as global recession will temporarily bring down demand and prices. But recessions will always pass, and global demand will go back up again, taking prices with it. The larger trend is following a broad path of linear change, and that trend is upward. For years, the hard trends made it utterly predictable that the market for automobiles would trend toward smaller and more fuel-efficient cars, cars with lower emissions, and ultimately cars that run on something other than exclusively petroleum fuel like batteries. It made no sense whatsoever to base a manufacturing strategy on large, gas-hungry vehicles with relatively little effort devoted to alternative fuel vehicles in hopes that gasoline would eventually become more affordable again. Yet, American automakers continue to spend millions fighting, proposing new emission standards, and billions in advertising and manufacturing costs to keep turning out large and inefficient gas guzzlers. The automakers were not alone. The government colluded in that fixated rearview mirror stare by creating economic incentives that made it more lucrative to continue churning out more of that dying breed. When I sat with Rack Wagoneer at the dinner in 2004, GM had just shifted its production focus from sedans to SUVs. SUVs were soaring in popularity, and it must have looked for all the world like the demand would keep going and going. It was one of those things that certainly seemed like the smart thing to do at the time. It's just that it wasn't. It was a classic example of the Elvis fallacy. I'm sure that Rick never imagined at the time that 5 years later, with him no longer at the helm, a bankrupt GM would sell off its ultimate gas-gulping muscle car, the Hummer, to a Chinese construction company with no automobile manufacturing experience. Yet that is what happened. The growing market demand for more fuel-efficient vehicles was a hard trend. GM losing its market dominance to Toyota was not a hard trend, because GM could have stopped it from happening, but they didn't. As GM goes, so goes the nation. Yet while that may have been true for the past half century, it's not necessarily going to stay true. It is a soft trend, not a hard trend. Just because things have been going a certain way, you cannot count on them to continue going that way unless they're based on a fixed, clearly measurable hard trend. In fact, if they are not clearly and causally linked to a hard trend, what you can count on is that they are going to change. The question is, in what direction is the change going to happen? To make sure we're clear on this, let's look for a moment at two other auto companies, Toyota and Hyundai. With GM sales shrinking and Toyota continuing to rise, it was clear to all that Toyota would take the title of number one automaker worldwide. But by early 2010, Toyota was suddenly embroiled in a crisis of its own, and it was Toyota's CEO, not GM, now sitting in the congressional hot seat, answering pointed questions about his own performance. This is the beauty of knowing how to recognize soft trends as well as hard trends. Knowing hard trends will tell you, for example, where technology is going and what capabilities we can expect to have in the future. But soft trends point to where the opportunity lies. If Toyota maker supremacy were a hard trend, there would be no point in having any competitive car companies at all. But it's not. The advances in technology are a certainty. Who implements those advances is soft. There may be no better example than Hyundai. For years the icon of automotive cheapness, Hyundai was often viewed as sort of the joke of the industry. In the midst of the economic hard times of 2009, someone at Hyundai got creative. They started running television ads saying, and also magazines and internet, buy a car from us, and if you lose your job or things get tough, We let you return it. No questions asked. Their sales took off like crazy. By 2010, Hyundai was making a credible bid for taking the lead in luxury autos, with models going head to head with BMW, Lexus, and Mercedes-Benz. We can predict with certainty many things about what kinds of vehicles we'll be buying 5 years from now. For example, we will still need trucks and larger cars because they will still be stuff to haul and we'll still want to have a way to fit whole families into vehicles. So the cars of the future will not at all be tiny. But we also know they will be more fuel efficient and green because of the hard trends of China's and India's demographics and the world and the realities of environmental impact. All these things we can know for sure. But as to who we'll be buying from, this is an aspect of future that is up for grabs. Not long ago, I spoke with a group of representatives from a large real estate company in Michigan about the difference between hard trends and soft trends. We had just gone through a definition of hard trend, and one man said, "Okay, I think I have an example. In Detroit, the auto manufacturers have been taking a real beating, and people are moving out in droves. In fact, they've been moving out for over a decade, and since the auto manufacturers are just doing worse and worse, it's a hard trend that people are going to continue moving out of Detroit for the foreseeable future, right?" Wrong. That's a soft trend. A very credible one, certainly, and one with a high degree of likelihood. But likelihood is not the same as certainty. Start with certainty, remember. What if Toyota or Hyundai bought or acquired GM? The key to opening the window that looks out onto the visible future is knowing how to distinguish a soft trend from a hard trend. It is knowing how to avoid falling for the Elvis fallacy. It is knowing how to recognize certainty. Finding the fortune in hard trends. Demographics is only one major source of hard trends. Another which we'll devote much in this course to exploring is the forward thrust of technological advancement. In 1993, I was invited to address a convention of the National Booksellers Association, attended by a crowd of some 10,000 people and bookstore owners. My keynote address included these remarks. Within the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to see a huge, successful virtual bookstore opening up online, and it's going to transform the way people shop for books. It could be one of you here in this room who does this, but chances are it will be some outsider, someone who is not already invested in the present way of doing things, someone who will look at things with fresh eyes and have a flash foresight. No one in the room took my comments too seriously. After all, this was 1983, and hardly anyone even knew the World Wide Web existed, much less what it was. Mosaic, the first graphical interface web browser, had just been released that April, and the first widely used browser, Netscape Navigator, would not appear until the end of the following year. The concept of e-commerce as we know it today did not yet even exist. And you already know what happened next. A year later, a 30-year-old entrepreneur incorporated a brand new company called Cadabra.com. A year after that, Cadabra launched an online book selling portal, which its founder eventually renamed Amazon. That entrepreneur was Bezos' Jeff, and 4 years later he was Time Magazine Man's of the Year cover story. Bezos saw the hard trend. Today he's one of the richest men in America. Back in 1993, of course, none of this had happened yet. But given the state of development of the World Wide Web and the increasing capabilities of home computers and modems, it was certain that it would certain enough to risk my reputation by going on record with that prediction to an audience of thousands. It wasn't a lucky guess, and it had nothing to do with being psychic. Given the hard trends, it was fully predictable. That Amazon prediction was not an isolated event. Over the past 25 years, I made hundreds of accurate predictions about the future of technology and how it will change every aspect of our lives. Here is a small sampling of my early predictions, including the year they were published. Note that they were all made publicly in speeches, articles, interviews, and books, and have not been edited in hindsight. I will be putting the image of date of publication and the prediction and fulfillment of the prediction in your screen. How could one possibly see these things happen before they happened? It is not guesswork or psychic activity, acuity. It's purely a question of knowing how and where to look and taking the time to do so. In my case, it was possibly to make all these predictions and hundreds more, even down to specific timelines many years ahead of time, simply because I spent a good deal of time studying hard trends in technology. Hard trends make the future visible. Once you see the distinction of hard trends, you start opening all sorts of doors to new possibilities. In the late 1980s, while working with executives at the Mayo Clinic, I asked them to take a look at their visible future. When they did, what they saw was a world of decreasing Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements, increasing losses in their emergency rooms, and a generally depressing economic scenario. The future they saw, based on what seemed to them the likely demographic and economic trends, looked bleak. But most of what they saw represented soft trends. The aging of the population itself was a hard trend, but that didn't necessarily have to translate into economic losses for the Mayo Clinic. I directed their attention to a few key hard trends they hadn't been looking at. The increasing presence of computers in consumers' homes and the increasing speed and power of those computers, along with the introduction of other technologies. A steady increasing in processing power and storage capacity, and a progressive miniaturization of components, were making it easier and easier to store, distribute, and search huge amounts of information, making it possible to access certain types of knowledge tools that had hidden been impossible. The world, in other words, was moving rapidly toward a knowledge-based economy. So I came up with this simple suggestion. Why not take advantage of that hard trend and turn the Mayo Clinic into an organization that derived income not only from treating people who came to their facilities, but also from selling their knowledge? From our vantage point today, this advice looks rather obvious, but it was a radical idea at that time. Remember, this was the late 1980s. The concept of CD-ROM was barely a few years old. Microsoft would not release Encarta, the first commercial CD-based encyclopedia, for another half a decade. Yet the Mayos credit, they leap at the idea. The result was a CD that consumers could use any time, day or night, to determine whether their child rash and fever required a trip to the emergency room or could be treated with aspirin, or to get top-notch professional help in any one of thousands of other medical situations. To some, this project seemed a long shot when they started spending time and money on it. After all, many wondered at that time, who would want access to medical guidance using a computer in their homes? When the long shot paid off, and paid off in a big way, the clinic put a 100 price tag on this product. In its first year, it sold 670,000 copies. That's 67 million in gross sales in just 1 year. A very profitable flash foresight. In fact, the benefits went even beyond sales of the immediate product by expanding its services to offer a knowledge-based product. The Mayo Clinic began developing a new and powerful 21st century brand in the marketplace. They not only created new value and new revenue, but with the subsequent rise of the internet, their name recognition became international. Today, when you visit mayoclinic.com or their social sites, you'll see their slogan, Tools for Healthier Lives. Their website lets you manage your health with information and tools that reflect the expertise of Mayo's 2,500 physicians and scientists. In other words, Mayo transformed itself from an organization that delivers on-site health care to an organization that delivers expertise and knowledge anytime, anywhere. Let's look at another example of using a hard trend to win in that marketplace. This one involving Dale Morgan, the mentor we met earlier. As the 90s got underway, researchers had been working hard to develop a type of liquid crystal display screen for commercial application. However, there was a technical challenge they could not seem to overcome: the frustrating slow refresh rate of the LCD's individual pixels, which fail and fast enough to provide a readable picture, was nowhere near fast enough to meet the demands of a commercial television screen. Around 1989, Dell Morgan had another of his big ideas. Why not add a bit of memory to each pixel? The memory would act as an image buffer, managing the flow of information to each pixel. As you watch the screen, you actually be about 1 second behind the broadcast, but no one would notice. Everyone told Dale he was crazy. Memory was far too expensive to make the idea even remotely feasible. Adding memory individually to each pixel would ball the cost of the average television setup into the tens of thousands of dollars. But Dale was not deterred. He knew a hard trend: the price of memory would fall dramatically, and so it has. After languishing quietly for a decade and a half, Dale's patent was ready when the hard trend caught up with it. Today, LCD screens claim more than 50% of market share, which means companies are shipping more than 100 million television sets around the world per year, and his matrix control technology is being used in plasma TVs as well. Dale is sitting on a modest fortune. His LCD patent became an idea where time had come, as he knew it would, because of the hard trend of technological advancement. Some $1 million flash foresights. Now let's be inventors ourselves for a moment. Let's say we want to take advantage of the certainty provided by the baby boom to create a successful business that will thrive in the years ahead. In fact, let's say we want to create a new $1 million company. Where do we look? You might start looking no further than your own family. At age 75, my mother used to say that climbing up and down her 3 flight of stairs keeps me young. She passed away at the age of 82, but if she had lived much longer, it's clear that she wouldn't have had to move. She knew this, but she didn't want to move. She loved living where she was, but because of the layout of the staircases in her house, electric chairlifts would have been out of the question, and as she became frailer, getting herself up and down throughout those floors would have become impossible. She was not alone. There are millions of people living in two-story homes who want to stay there, but who will soon face the same problem my mother faced. And that's nothing compared to her children's generation. When you put a 78 million strong baby boom to this furniture situation, the problem becomes enormous, and so does the opportunity. One flash foresight solution: retrofit these homes with personal elevators. The highest of high-end homes have had these for years. Why not bring the feature to the average home? Installing an elevator inside a home would be complicated, expensive, and in many cases not practical. So let's do what some hotels have done and go opposite. Put the elevator on the outside. It's inexpensive and practical. It gets your parents up and down, and it gives them a good view of the neighborhood to boot. So you develop an inexpensive, lightweight, durable elevator that retrofits on the outside of the house and goes up just one story. Would there be a market for that? There sure would. Baby boomers have parents just like my mom, so they need them now, and they'll need them even more in the future, and when they are in the same situation themselves. Throughout this course on Flash Foresight, we'll explore entrepreneurial ideas that tap a range of technological hard trends. For now, let's stay with this hard trend of baby boom demographics and use it to come up with a handful of other ideas you could flesh out to become full-fledged million-dollar entrepreneurial enterprises. Boomer video games. We have immersive participatory video games for kids that place the user right into the action in wars, science fiction worlds, and all sorts of things. What about video games for baby boomers? That place you at Woodstock, the 1968 Democratic Convention, or the trial of the Chicago 7, and let you interact with your friends within those events. Late life financial planning. In the past generations, financial planners help you make money, accumulate money, and then plan how to give it away. Today, because we're living much longer, that strategy is undergoing a radical change. Unlike their parents and grandparents, those of the baby boom generation plan on doing something different after retiring instead of dying after a few years, living and for a long time. The focus in senior financial planning is now shifting from accumulating and transferring wealth to making one's money last, in many cases, for decades. Today, more than 80% of the wealth in the United States is controlled by people over the age of 50. 10 years from now, that mass of wealth will be in the hands of people preparing for retirement, or at least their version of retirement. They'll be getting conservative with their money, looking for stocks with a dividend, and they're going to stay that way because they know they won't have another lifetime to make up the shortfall if they're not conservative. Will that have an impact on the stock market? It certainly will. Is that bad news? Only if you didn't know about it ahead of time. How can you find ways as a financial services company, a fintech, to serve that emerging market? On retirement homes. The entire concept of nursing homes is ripe for evolution. The majority of baby boomers do not expect to fully retire, but will stay engaged in some sorts of gainful employment, often different from the work of their past career. Volunteerism, social involvement, entrepreneurialism, and collaborative new ventures will be commonplace career shift choices, and because of advances in healthcare, wellness, and life extension, boomers are going to live a lot longer. There will be a huge market for living facilities that combine the healthcare resources of nursing homes with more upscale styling and site design that better suits this sort of second life lifestyle. Let's call them on-retirement homes. And what about specially themed on-retirement homes? A commune-style home would focus on gardening, energy self-sufficiency, and other sorts of back-to-the-land endeavors. How about an on-retirement home where everyone plays music? Or you could create an on-retirement home that focused on fine cuisine, or arts and letters, or theater or electronics. Or here's another thought. Why don't create an e-harmony for elders? Not for dating, but so we can match roommates in nursery homes. I recently heard in the news that an elderly person was charged with murder. She couldn't stand her nursing home roommate and strangled her. Green funeral homes and boomer cemeteries. Baby boomers are on average going to live a lot longer than their parents, but we all die eventually. When that population swell hits dying age, the nation will probably be not prepared with cemeteries that we were with nursery schools, grade schools, or colleges. The burial industry, macabre thought it sounds to say it, will become an enormously profitable growth niche, and not everyone wants to be buried. Cremation centers will boom too. This is not purely a matter of available land, but also one of approach. What does a 21st century environmentally consciously cemetery look like? As boomers approach their final chapter in life and focus on leaving a legacy, what kind of funeral service do they want? How can we evolve the entire funeral burial farewell process so that it becomes more than a one time ceremony and makes more of an ongoing impact and contribution to the world? Because if you can find a way to design that experience, this generation will want to buy it. You, the American automaker. Now let's take that same perspective. Only this time you're not an entrepreneur brainstorming a startup. This time you are an American automaker. You have decided to keep your eye on the hard trends, to steer clear of the Elvis fallacy, and to drive your company straight into the visible future. What do you do now? You may start by asking, where's your market? Today GM sells more cars and trucks to China than any other company in the world. If you're GM, you already know something Rick Wagoner evidently didn't know in 2004, so he should have and easily could have. Unless you make some radical shifts in the kinds of vehicles you're manufacturing, someone else will be outselling you in China within 10 years at most, and probably a lot sooner than that. And that's not a maybe. You know that for certain. How do you know that? Because petroleum fuels over the long term are going to continue to become more and more costly, both economically and environmentally. In parts of China today, there are already new emission standards that are equivalent to the target set for 10 years from now in California, our most environmentally progressive state. In other words, in terms of environmentally impact, America at its most progressive is a good decade behind Chinese market demand. China has been looking on its own fumes, and they are starting to make the tough decisions that the United States is still avoiding. American automakers have been complaining that they can meet more stringent emission standards and better MPG ratings because it would cost them billions. That's rearview mirror thinking. Unless they start producing the vehicles the world of the future will need, those billions won't be there anyway. As an American automaker, what will you do? With your eyes firmly on the visible future, you won't grudgingly try to meet those numbers. You'll immediately look for ways you can leap ahead and exceed them. There are roughly 1 billion kids today in emerging nations who are going to enter the consumer market over the next 5 to 8 years. Add to them the hundreds of millions of adults in these emerging nations who wants cars now. This demographic group will be in the market for close to a billion new cars over the next decade. That's a hard trend. It will happen. Who's going to make and sell them? That's a soft trend. We can be certain about the answer to that one. And in fact, we can change the answer to that one. To do that, we need to ask a different question. One we can be certain about. What kind of cars will they be? They're going to be eco-friendly cars that are inexpensive and have a small profile, so they can fit on the narrower streets of those emerging economies. They are going to be a combination of electric vehicles and hybrids running on multiple fuels. Why? Again, a hard trend. We are going to reduce our exclusive reliance on oil as our primary automotive fuel. That's a whole different kind of car. Someone is going to make an absolute fortune selling those cars in America, Africa, Middle East, India, China, and the rest of Asia. If you don't serve this emerging market, someone else will. In India, where the streets are quite narrow, the Indian automobile manufacturer Tata is already designing very small cars for use there, and they have announced their intention to market a hybrid version of their tiny car, making the world's smallest and cheapest hybrid. Tata's auto is named appropriately enough that the Nano. And look out, Europe and America. Tata now owns Jaguar and Land Rover. What if instead of leaving innovation to the newcomers, as the booksellers did with Amazon, you decided to refocus the resources of your American auto company onto designing cars for these emerging markets? Or another type of motion, like for example scooters. In fact, what if you put your focus on becoming the best automaker and transportation maker on the planet by doing that? You would be going with the tide instead of against it. Financial profits would be immense, as would the goodwill and brand power you would generate. Imagine the shot in the arm you would engender, not only for your own beleaguered industry, but for American industry as a whole. But we got major manufacturing cost problems. You point. How can we possibly compete with Toyota's approach to manufacture? Well, why not go with a model like Dell's? Today, in hindsight, everyone can readily see how brilliant the Dell model was. But when Michael Dell set out to have other manufacturers make its computers according to Dell's consumer specs, to have people for the computer they wanted, not from a showroom, but sight unseen, and then take their money and go manufacture it out of parts from their just-in-time supply chain. People thought he was crazy and a fool. He was not a fool. He had a flash foresight and acted on it. They later lost its way because they grew big and sought to milk their cash cow instead of continuing to pioneer and innovate. But a model of just-in-time inventory, a highly responsive supply chain, and customer custom design is even more practical today than when Dell first explored it. Early in Ford's history, founder Henry Ford made a famous remark about his Model T. Customers can have it any color they like, so long as it's black. Ford's greatest contribution to technology was the concept of assembly line mass production, a process that derives its power from the uniformity of its product. At the time, Ford's insight was itself a flash foresight. Yet a century later, that is still the approach of American automakers today. We still haggle over our limited options on the shop floor and pay through the nose for extra features. Meanwhile, the truth of today's manufacturing technology is that it's now possible to produce 100 uniquely different items at nearly the same profitability of producing 100 exact replicas of the same item. Have it your way is not just a fast food slogan. It's an accurate distillation of 21st century consumer expectation. And that, my friends, consumer expectation is a strategic factor. You need to focus what consumers are going to expect and search for. So why not give your customers pre-order custom design automobiles instead of keeping all that massive investment in manufacturing capacity? Outsource all the manufacturing. Let your customers go online, like now with Tesla. Choose the features they want and design the car they want. Make a down payment and then go have it made cash up front. Instead of tying up billions in manufacturing capacity, they're using the customer's money. Dell computers are made in Taiwan. So are IBM's. So are Apple's. Where it's made isn't the point. It's still a Dell or a Mac because it's manufactured to Dell's or Apple's brand and quality specs. We could just as easily manufacture our GM cars overseas. Or the new trend about the nearshoring here in Mexico. Or here's a thought. Instead of outsourcing your labor, why not insource it? Have it done right here in the United States, as Toyota is doing. Toyota makes most of the cars for the American market here in the United States, and they are hiring American workers to do it. In fact, why not talk with Toyota and explore the possibility of them being your manufacturing arm? Why don't you have US workers building your cars according to Toyota specs with your company name on it? With your highly customizable fluid design Dell model, you're going to need to hire a lot more engineers. And with the popularity of your new on-demand customizable autos, soon your plans are going to be hiring, not laying off. Even before doing any of the above, there's one sweeping change you might make as an American auto company. Stop thinking of yourself as an American auto company and start seeing yourself instead as a world auto company, building cars all over the world, using employees all over the world to serve markets all over the world. Could you perhaps form a strategic alliance with Tata, or if you rather set up your own manufacturing facility over there? China has already realized it can't continue building conventional polluting 20th century cars, and has now set a goal of becoming the number one hybrid car manufacturer on the planet. Why not build your own facility over there and build for them? And while you're becoming a global car company, why not also become an green car company? Instead of building cars in China and shipping them to the United States, which Jim now is doing, build your autos all over the world. Manufacture them locally for the markets they're going to serve. So you stop all the polluting involved in all that shipping, and at that time start employing the local populations to build their own cars. Of course, you haven't solved all your problems. You got some major issues with labor and healthcare to deal with. You're going to show your labor unions how to look at a visible future, because you're going to need 21st century unions that are focused on retraining their workers for the visible future, instead of protecting and defending the turf by bygone years. That is, unions that understand the need to shift from lifelong employment to lifelong employability, and you'll need to completely redesign your approach to healthcare. We'll talk more about both issues later, but in the pursuit of your car company's makeover, you're well on your way. Strategy based on certainty has low risk and high reward. Base your strategies on certainty and of customer expectations, on the known future visible hard trends and the soft trends that you can manipulate, knowing which is which and acting accordingly, and you will build something that will not only survive but even thrive in the years ahead. Hope is not a strategy, Certainty definitely is. It's an strategic factor.